on the left.
Straight to the Commons, Boris Johnson making a statement on the proposed state visit by Donald Trump.
What the president did was...
in US immigration policy. In view of the understandable concern and uncertainty, it may be helpful if I describe for the House the consequences for British citizens and dual nationals of the executive order issued last Friday. Let me begin by saying that this is not a UK policy, and it is not our policy, nor is it a measure that this government would consider. I've already made clear our anxiety about measures that discriminate on grounds of nationality in ways that are divisive and wrong. On the 27th of January, President Trump issued an executive order banning the citizens of 7 countries from entering the US for a period of 90 days. Those countries are Syria, Iraq, Iran, Somalia, Yemen, Libya, and Sudan. The order makes clear that no US visas will be issued to citizens of those states, and anyone who already has a visa will be denied entry. The immigration policy of the United States is, of course, a matter for the government of the United States, but on the face of it, this executive order has consequences for some British citizens. For that reason, I spoke yesterday to the US administration, and my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has today spoken to General Kelly, the Secretary of Homeland Security. I'm able to provide the following clarification. The general principle is that all British passport holders remain welcome to travel to the US. We have received assurances from the US Embassy that this executive order will make no difference to any British passport holder, irrespective of their country of birth or whether they hold another passport. In any case, the executive order is a temporary measure intended to last for 90 days until the US system has added new security precautions. This is, of course, a highly controversial policy which has caused unease, and I repeat that this is not an approach that this government would take. But let me conclude by reminding the House of the vital importance of this country's alliance with the United States in defence, intelligence, which I'm sure they appreciate and understand on that side. On defence, intelligence and security, we work together more closely than any other 2 countries in the world. That relationship is overwhelmingly to our benefit. The Prime Minister's highly successful visit to the White House last week underlined the strength of that transatlantic alliance. Where we have differences with the United States, we will not quail from expressing them, as I have done today.
Order. Let me just say to the House that it is obvious that there is huge interest in this matter, which colleagues can rely upon me to accommodate. I understand the strength of feeling, but the Foreign Secretary's statement, and indeed upcoming his answers to questions, must be heard. The Foreign Secretary.
Where we have differences with the US, we will not hesitate to express them, as I have done today. If they were listening, if the members opposite were listening, as the Prime Minister did yesterday, as she did indeed in her excellent speech in Philadelphia last week. But we also repeat our resolve to work alongside the Trump administration in the mutual interest of both our countries. And I commend this statement to the House.
Emily Thornberry.
Mr. Speaker, let me start by saying this. I'm sure that the whole House will want to join me in expressing our sorrow at last night's gun attack on a Canadian mosque, which left 6 dead and 8 injured. They were all victims of hate, and we are all under a duty to stand up to hate, whenever and in whatever form it appears. I thank this Foreign Secretary for advance sight of his statement. I have to say, I thought there were a few pages missing, but apparently not. And so I hope that, Mr. Speaker, you will allow me to ask some questions on details that were missing from this statement, and also to ask about its timing. First, on the detail. As the Secretary of State knows, there are thousands of people in Britain who live here on a permanent basis, but who are also nationals of the 7 listed countries, and they have no dual citizenship. Many of them are here with indefinite leave to remain, having fled persecution or war. Can the Secretary of State confirm, based on what he has said today, that these thousands of British residents are now barred from travelling to the United States? People like Dr. Hamaseh Taheri, an Iranian national living and working in Glasgow, who on Friday was told that she wasn't allowed to fly home from Costa Rica because she was going to need to change planes in New York. Similarly, if a Somali national with a temporary US visa is currently in the UK visiting their family, can he confirm that they cannot now return to the US under these rules? I hope he can clarify these points. Turning now to the timing of this announcement. This order was issued at 9:45 on Friday UK time. It then took number 10 until midnight on Saturday, a full 27 hours later, to say that they would consider the impact on UK nationals. It then took the Prime Minister until Sunday morning to tell the Foreign Secretary to telephone the White House, and it took him until midday on Sunday to call the travel ban divisive and wrong. That is 38 hours. 38 hours, Mr. Speaker, to have the courage to say what everyone else was saying on Friday night. And finally, 46 hours after the executive order, we got clarification that UK nationals and dual nationals would not be affected. If this was because the wheels in Washington were slow to turn, it might be understandable. But look at Canada. They were immediately in touch on Saturday with their American counterparts, and by that evening, they had secured the travel rights of Canadian nationals a full 17 hours before we had secured ours. So can I ask the Secretary of State, Canada is supposed to be 5 hours behind the UK, so why were they a day ahead of us when it came to resolving this issue? And finally, a point on timing. The order was signed barely an hour or two after the Prime Minister had left the White House. Can he tell us, in their discussions about terrorism and security, was this imminent order mentioned? Because I don't know, Mr. Speaker, what's worse, that the President would have such little respect for the Prime Minister that he wouldn't think of telling her, or that he did, and that she didn't think it sounded wrong. If it was the first, it would hardly be a surprise. But if it was the latter, then we really do have a problem, Mr. Speaker. Because when it comes to human rights, when it comes to women's rights, when it comes to torture and the treatment of minorities, President Trump is already descending down a very dangerous slope. And when that happens, we need a Prime Minister who is prepared to tell him to stop, not one who simply proffers her hand and silently helps him along.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I listened very carefully to I think the most substantial point the Right Honourable Lady had to make was about a particular case of a Glaswegian doctor, and I appreciate that there will be all sorts of cases, particularly difficult cases, heartbreaking cases, people who experience a lot of frustration as a result of this measure, which I repeat because I perhaps members didn't follow it first time. This is not the policy of Her Majesty's government. This is a policy that is being promoted elsewhere. What we will do is make sure that we, all our consular network, all our diplomatic network, is put at the service of people who are finding difficulties as a result of these measures. But as I say, because of the energetic action of this government, we now have, by the Prime Minister, by my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, we have an exemption for UK passport holders, whether dual nationals or otherwise. And I think most fair-minded people would say that that actually showed the advantages of working closely with the Trump administration, the advantages of having a relationship that enables us to get our point across, and to get the vital protections for UK passport holders that they need. And I may say that the approach taken by the party opposite, pointlessly to demonise the Trump administration, would have achieved the very opposite.
Mr. Crispin Blunt.
Mr. Speaker, does the Foreign Secretary welcome the joint statement by Senators John McCain and Lindsey Graham, expressing their fear that this executive order will be a self-inflicted wound in the fight against terrorism?
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. I think possibly what the interventions of Senator McCain and Senator Graham show is that this is a subject for lively debate on Capitol Hill, as it is here in this House. And I repeat that this is something that we do not support. It's not a policy that we agree with, and it's clear from what my right honourable friend says that there are others in the US who don't agree either.
Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Foreign Secretary for advance sight of his statement. Without a thought to the context, on Holocaust Memorial Day, President Trump issued an executive order to ban those born in 7 predominantly Muslim countries from entering the USA, including, and I quote, those bad dudes who are actually the real victims of violence who are fleeing the conflict in Syria. This action is inhumane, it's racist, and it's immoral. And I welcome the fact, Mr. Speaker, that this House is now treating the threat posed by President Trump with the seriousness that it deserves. We also, on these benches, would like to pay tribute and support the strong statements that have been made on this issue by Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, and welcome the work that's already been done by so many. You can learn some lessons from Scotland's First Minister. And pay tribute to the work being done by so many on the ground in Scotland, particularly Women for Independence, Mr. Speaker, who provided moral and practical support to those who have been unjustly affected by this despicable action. But can I ask the Foreign Secretary, given the Prime Minister's blossoming and frank relationship with President Trump, did she know in advance that the President was to issue this order, which has concerned so many of our citizens? And does he agree with senior national security experts in the US and elsewhere that this will have national security implications for the UK, given that the US administration has now adopted Daesh's false narrative that theirs is a conflict between the West and Islam? If we want to be a global leader, this government needs to show global leadership. Where is it? The Prime Minister has been tested, and she has failed on this, her first challenge.
Well, as the Honourable Lady will know, when it comes to tackling the scourge of Daesh, and she's absolutely right, this country is the second biggest contributor to military action in strikes against Daesh in Iraq and in Syria, and we continue to be the second biggest donor to the humanitarian crisis in that region. And everybody in this House should be incredibly proud of the leadership that the UK is showing in that respect. Mr. Speaker, I have already made my views about this. I don't see. It is up to members of the House of Commons, if they wish to exhaust the wells of outrage in the denunciation of this policy. I've made my position clear. I made it clear yesterday. I said it was right. I said it was wrong to promulgate policies that stigmatise people on the basis of their nationality, and I believe that very profoundly. What we have done in the last few days, is to intercede on behalf of UK nationals, which is our job, and UK passport holders, and we have secured very important protections for them.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Trump is what we might call a known unknown. We know that he will do and say unpredictable things and often just as quickly abandon those positions. He will learn as he goes along. And what we have to remember is that our security and that of Europe depends on the Atlantic Alliance. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that there must be no question of our refusing to welcome him to these shores in the hope of setting him along the right path as soon as possible to our mutual benefit?
Well, my right honourable friend is entirely right in the sense that the Prime Minister succeeded the other day in getting her message across about the North Atlantic Alliance, about NATO, and President Trump affirmed very strongly his commitment to that alliance. It's vital for our security, particularly the Article 5 guarantee. And the new President is, I think, very much in the right place on that. And it is totally right. It is totally right that, and he said so, it is totally right, of course, that the incoming President of our closest and most important ally should be accorded the honour of a state visit. That's supported by this government, and the invitation has been extended by Her Majesty the Queen quite properly.
Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is not just about the impact on British citizens. Yes. One of our closest allies has chosen to ban refugees and target Muslims. Yeah. And all he can say is that, well, it wouldn't be our policy. That is not good enough. Has he urged the US administration to lift this order, to help refugees and to stop targeting Muslims? This order was signed on Holocaust Memorial Day.
Which makes it
for the
so
sake
much
of
worse.
history, for heaven's sake, have the guts to speak out.
As I say, it is open to MPs opposite on all sides of the House to come forward with yet fresh expressions of outrage about the presidential executive order. I have made my views, and they're entitled to it. I have made my, and I share the widespread disquiet, and I have made my views absolutely clear. I've said that it's divisive, I've said that it's wrong, and I've said that it stigmatizes people on grounds of their nationality. But what I will not do, which is what I think the party opposite would do, is disengage from conversations with our American friends and partners in such a way as to do material damage to the interests of UK citizens. What we have secured are important protections for people in this country, and that is the job of this government.
Mr. Simon Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given our newfound closeness with the Trump administration, what plans does my right honourable friend have to try and persuade the administration after the 90 days to abandon what to many is a despicable and immoral policy? And would my right honourable friend agree in paraphrasing a far wiser president, John F. Kennedy, that those that ride on the back of a tiger end up inside it?
Well said, Burns.
And I'm sure that the words of the right honourable gentleman will be heard in Washington. But all I can say is that we will continue, Mr. Speaker, to engage with the administration to make our points about the interests of UK nationals, and of course, wait for it, and of course, to convey our feelings about the global consternation that this measure has caused.
Mr. Hilary Benn.
Mr. Speaker, could the Foreign Secretary clarify what would be the position for an Iraqi national resident in the United Kingdom whose child is working in the United States and is a dual British and Iraqi citizen in the event that that child died? Would her mother be able to travel from London to the United States to bury her daughter under the current US arrangements? And if not, would he agree with me that that would be quite simply inhuman and outrageous?
Yes, of course it is possible to create all sorts of hypothetical situations which are yet more outrageous. But the answer, as far as I understand the matter, you will appreciate that it is up for the US to explain this aspect of their policy. The answer is that such a case would be treated very expeditiously, and particular arrangements would be put in place to ensure that that person was able to travel to the US.
Order, I will do my best to accommodate the extensive interest in this subject, but can I gently and perhaps tactfully point out that members who toddled into the chamber after the Foreign Secretary's statement had begun should not be standing. It is in defiance of the conventions of the place, and I'm sure they wouldn't be so unreasonable as to think that they would have a right to be called, because that would be perverse, and they wouldn't behave in a perverse way, I feel sure. Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that the United States Congress and the courts
as well as the President and diplomacy, will play a part in arriving at a solution over this question. Does my right honourable accept there is a universal threat from jihadists, and that Europol itself, as an example, have estimated there are up to 5,000 jihadists who've come over from several of these countries, and that furthermore we should also remember the victims of 9/11 in New York, 7/7 in London, Paris, Brussels and Berlin, not to mention Lee Rigby.
Of course, Mr. Speaker, we understand the threat from jihadists both at home and abroad, and that's why it's ever more vital that we work with our American friends to combat that threat.
Mr. Dennis Skinner.
Will the Foreign Secretary, just for a moment, try to recall, along with me, as I hid underneath the stairs when two fascist dictators, Mussolini and Hitler, were raining bombs on towns and cities in Britain. Now this government's hand in hand with another fascist, Trump. And what I say to him, do the decent thing and ban the visit. This man is not fit to walk in the footsteps of Nelson Mandela.
Well, I hesitate to say it, but the honourable gentleman's memory must be at fault if he thinks Mussolini rained bombs on this country. But I hear the comparison that he makes. I don't accept that comparison. I believe it's our interest to work with our American friends and partners to show our disquiet where that is appropriate and to get the best deal for UK nationals and dual nationals.